We will plow our filthy claw into this arcane soil, and there Nurgle's children will twitch and grow. Go forth and play.
The pustulant pets run forward, a childish spark in their gazed eyes. Xanthor feels proud as he herds them into white valleys and shiny rock formations. No enthusiastic life can flourish in such clean environment. The smelly mud that pours out of nowhere, following Nurgle's blister vanguard, quickly meets Hysh's light. Shying away, burned to a crisp. A deep cloud of smoke and dust rises from where the filth meets the cleansing fire of Ielven runes. There, two deep lights seemingly float in mid-air. These spectral eyes observe the hateful procession with a fiery patience. The Ielven horns echo in the background. The blue banners of Ymetrica rise above the ash. The mountain roars. Xanthor. Yes, I know your name. The Nurgle general stops. His smile decays into a frown. He recognizes the spectre.
You should be dancing in our garden, not winging our festivities. Beware. Even ghosts can rot.
The beasts of Nurgle growl, as if upset by the delay.
Remove your filth. You do not deserve to stand on this hallowed ground. You Elvens need some disease to appreciate life. So be it.
The battle tactic is Intimidate Invaders. Horticulus activates Heroic Willpower. Ellania and Ellathor activate Realm Wanderers and generate an extra command point. The Enlightener casts Rune of Petrification using 2 primordial dice, but it is unbound. Ellania and Ellathor cast Total Eclipse using 1 Aether Quartz and 1 primordial dice. Nurgle fails to unbind using 2 primordial dice. Ellania and Ellathor cast Mystic Shield on the Bladelords. The Lord Regent casts Protection of Hysh. The Calligrave casts Hoarfrost on the Bladelord for a -2 to rend. The Enlightener casts Speed of Hysh, but it is unbound. Eltharion deals 4 damage to the Beast of Nurgle. The Spirit of the Mountain activates all-out attack and deals 2 damage to the Beast of Nurgle. The Lumineth score 3 victory points. The battle tactic is Intimidate Invaders. The Great Unclean One fails to activate Heroic Leadership. The Great Unclean One casts Mystic Shield on himself. The Great Unclean One casts Flaming Weapon using 1 primordial dice. The Great Unclean One activates at the double on himself. Nurgle summons a Sloppity Bilepiper. Nurgle scores 3 victory points. The battle tactic is led into the Maelstrom. Horticulus activates Cultivating the Garden of Nurgle. The Great Unclean One activates Their Finest Hour. The Enlightener fails to activate Heroic Leadership. The Great Unclean One casts Mystic Shield, but it is unbound. The Great Unclean One casts Flaming Weapon, but it is unbound. The Lumineth use a primordial dice to unbind. The Bladelords activate Redeploy. Deals no damage to the Bladelords. The Plague Drones deal 3 damage to the Stoneguard. The Beast of Nurgle deals 1 damage to Eltharion, using the Pestilent Battering Rams. The Great Unclean One activates Mountain of Loathsome Flesh and deals 3 damage to the Spirit of the Mountain. The Spirit of the Mountain activates Roar on the Great Unclean One. The Bilepiper activates My Love is Like a Ripe, Ripe Fart. The Spirit of the Mountain activates Stoneheart Shockwave on the Great Unclean One. The Spirit of the Mountain activates All-Out Defense. The Great Unclean One deals 1 damage to the Spirit of the Mountain. Eltharion finishes off a Beast of Nurgle. Ellania and Ellathor finish off a Beast of Nurgle. The Beast of Nurgle deals 2 damage to the Stoneguard that deal 1 damage back. The Spirit of the Mountain deals 3 damage to the Great Unclean One. The Beast of Nurgle fails to deal any damage to the Aetherwings that fail to deal any damage back. The Beast of Nurgle fails to deal any damage to Eltharion. Disease finishes off the Stoneguard and deals 3 damage to the Spirit of the Mountain, and a total of 3 damage to the Bladelord units and 2 damage to Eltharion. Nurgle scores 6 victory points. The battle tactic is led into the Maelstrom. The Enlightener fails to activate heroic leadership. Ellania and Ellathor activate Realm Wanderers and generate an extra command point. The Great Unclean One fails to activate heroic leadership. The Lord Regent casts Protection of Hysh. The Calligrave fails to cast Hoarfrost. Ellania and Ellathor fail to cast Total Eclipse. The Enlightener casts Rune of Petrification, but it is unbound. The Enlightener fails to cast Merciless Blizzard. Ellania and Ellathor suffer a primordial miscast, with 2 primordial dice, trying to cast Gnashing Jaws, suffering a total of 4 damage. The Great Unclean One activates Redeploy on the Beast of Nurgle. The Enlightener deals 2 damage to the Beast of Nurgle. Eltharion deals 1 damage to the Beast of Nurgle. The Spirit of the Mountain fails to deal any damage to the Great Unclean One. The Spirit of the Mountain activates Roar on the Great Unclean One. The Great Unclean One activates Mountain of Loathsome Flesh and deals 2 damage to the Spirit of the Mountain. The Spirit of the Mountain activates Stoneheart Shockwave on the Great Unclean One. The Bile Piper activates My Love is Like a Ripe, Ripe Fart. Eltharion finishes off a Beast of Nurgle. The Bladelords deal 10 damage to the Great Unclean One. The Great Unclean One deals 3 damage to the Bladelords. Ellania and Ellathor deal 3 damage to the Beast of Nurgle. The Spirit of the Mountain activates all-out attack and finishes off the Great Unclean One. Ellania and Ellathor activate all-out defense. The Beast of Nurgle deals 2 damage to Ellania and Ellathor. Disease deals 1 damage to Ellania and Ellathor and 1 damage to the Bladelords. The Lumineth score 4 victory points. The battle tactic is bait and trap. Horticulus activates heroic leadership. The Enlightener activates heroic leadership. Ellania and Ellathor activate redeploy. The Beast of Nurgle deals 3 damage to the Aetherwings using his pestilent battering rams. The other Beast of Nurgle deals 1 damage to the Bladelords using its pestilent battering rams. Ellania and Ellathor activate all-out defense. The Beast of Nurgle slays Ellania and Ellathor, but the Enlightener uses the Phoenix Stone, bringing them back. Ellania and Ellathor finish off the Beast of Nurgle. The Bladelords deal 1 damage to the Beast of Nurgle. The Beast of Nurgle deals 1 damage to the Bladelords. The Beast of Nurgle finishes off the Aetherwings. Disease finishes off Ellania and Ellathor and deals a total of 3 damage to the Bladelord units. Nurgle scores 6 victory points. The battle tactic is conserve Aether Quartz. The Enlightener activates heroic leadership. Articulus activates heroic willpower. The Lord Regent casts Protection of Hysh. The Calligrave activates Deep Thinkers and casts Rune of Petrification. The Enlightener casts Gnashing Jaws, but it is unbound. Nurgle uses 2 primordial dice to unbind. The Enlightener casts Overwhelming Heat on the Plague Drones, causing 2 damage, and the Bilepiper, causing 3 damage. The Enlightener casts Merciless Blizzard on the Plague Drones, dealing 12 damage, and takes 1 damage back. The Enlightener finishes off the Plague Drones. Both the Spirit of the Mountain and Eltharion fail to deal any damage to the Bilepiper. The Lord Regent activates Forward to Victory. The Spirit of the Mountain fails to activate Stomp on the Plague Bearers, dealing no damage. The Spirit of the Mountain activates Stoneheart Shockwave on the Beast of Nurgle. The Bile Piper activates My Love is Like a Ripe, Ripe Fart. The Bladelords deal 10 damage to the Plague Bearers. The Spirit of the Mountain activates Aether Quartz for a +1 to hit. The Spirit of the Mountain deals 8 damage to the Plague Bearers. The Spirit of the Mountain activates All-Out Defense. The Beast of Nurgle deals no damage to the Spirit of the Mountain. Eltharion finishes off the Beast of Nurgle. The Bladelords deal 1 damage to the Beast of Nurgle. The Plague Bearers deal no damage to the Spirit of the Mountain. The Lord Regent deals 4 damage to the Beast of Nurgle. The Bile Piper activates Inspiring Presence on the Plague Bearers. Disease deals 1 damage to Eltharion, 3 damage to the Bladelords, and 2 damage to the Spirit of the Mountain. The Lumineth scores 6 victory points. The battle tactic is Magical Mayhem. Eltharion activates Heroic Recovery, healing 2 wounds. Horticulus activates Heroic Willpower. Calligrave casts Hoarfrost on the Bladelords for a -3 to rend, using an Aether Quartz. The Enlightener casts Gnashing Jaws, but it is unbound. The Enlightener fails to cast Merciless Blizzard. The Lord Regent casts Arcane Bolt. The Rune of Petrification finishes off the Beast of Nurgle and deals 2 damage to the Plague Bearers, 2 damage to the Beast of Nurgle, and 1 damage to the Bile Piper. The Lord Regent releases the Arcane Bolt and finishes off the Bile Piper. The Rune of Petrification deals 2 damage to Horticulus and 1 damage to the Beast of Nurgle. The Spirit of the Mountain activates All-Out Attack, but fails to deal any damage to the Plague Bearers. The Enlightener deals 1 damage to the Beast of Nurgle. Eltharion fails to deal any damage to the Horticulus. The Spirit of the Mountain fails to activate Stomp on the Plague Bearers. Eltharion finishes off Horticulus. So, very hard matchup for both sides. I think that the Lumineth always struggle a little bit with a lot of wounds, and this Nurgle army had a lot of wounds. And one of the main characteristics of this Nurgle army is that those wounds are spread out. So whenever it's Nurgle's turn, it heals back at least 1 wound per model. And despite being Nurgle, it was relatively fast army list, so Lumineth had to be very careful about positioning, especially protecting its flanks and its heroes. Now in this new edition, one of the things I've noticed here is that wizards are very important, and magic is overall more powerful, both endless spells and generic lore spells from the new GHB. But spells are harder to cast because the other side might have an extra dice coming from the primal magic dice that you have access to in this new General's Handbook. This was especially true during this game. I was playing Lumineths and my dice were not that great. So it made all the difference in the world for the Nurgle player to roll those extra dice, because even though I might have +1 to cast or rerolls, and I could use my special dice also, I depend a lot on getting that spell through, so I'll risk it more. And both in terms of battle tactics and in terms of damage or in terms of buffs or debuffs, it's really important that the spell goes through. And my dice were not that great, and the Nurgle player's dice in that specific phase were very good, and he used those extra primal dice very well. By the way, you'll listen throughout the battle report me talking about primordial dice. Ignore it. It's primal dice. Okay, my bad. So that was very important. Throughout the game, primal dice had a very significant impact, especially for the Unbind. I did miscast once because I was greedy and I was being pressured into getting one spell through. And of course, if you have bad dice, you start leaning more into, I need to achieve this, I need to risk it more. But the overall result was not that bad. And curiously enough, the game was more or less decided also on the base of spells. Both in turn 3 for Lumineth, where the Merciless Blizzard went off on the Plague Drones, almost wiping them out in a single go, and also the Rune of Petrification that ended up chipping damage all over the place in the Nurgle backline and allowing me to kill the Bile Piper that was really messing things up because I wasn't able to pile in with the Bladelords. I got stuck in combat. I was getting disease all over the place, so it was very hard. A couple of things to notice. The Nurgle player didn't summon when it had 21 summoning points. My guess is, and I hadn't spoken to him about it, I think he was trying to get that Great Unclean One back, although it was too late by the end of turn 3 because I got the double turn into round 4, and eventually he lost his hero, so he was only going to be able to summon from the trees. But another detail that I really wanted to point out is the individual heroes for the Lumineth army. Both Eltharion and also the twins, Ellania and Ellathor, did a tremendous amount of work. Eltharion is amazing if you don't play him against the wrong things. And in this game, I think he killed like 3 or 4 beasts of Nurgle, and then he wiped out Articulus. So he's very, very strong in individual melee duels. Never put him against something like a horde that does mortal wounds or anything like that. The other hero that I tried out this time was Ellania and Ellathor. They also did a good job. They never got to teleport because I never got to roll below the wounds I suffered or below the battle round. But they are a very good wizard. They have a +1 to cast, Unbind, and Dispel. And they did a lot of work, especially pinning down the Beasts of Nurgle and threatening the Great Unclean One also. I really enjoyed playing with them, and I'll play with them again probably. The Bladelords, speaking about my army list. 20 Bladelords, I haven't seen those anywhere in any competitive setting. I really like Bladelords because they are, in terms of the paper rules, very good, but they are very hard to protect. If I don't get that protection of Hysh going, and I did get lucky on that, it's a high cast value, they struggle a lot because their save is 4 up, even though they have +/-1 to hit from the Shining Company, it's fragile. This time around, I didn't play against stuff that has a lot of attacks and a lot of damage, but my guess is that I would have to screen them properly if I went into those opponents. Despite that, I really think they are very interesting. Trying to build a list around them. They protect heroes, they do mortal wounds, they are very versatile in melee. And if you get your spells right, they can be buffed to move a lot and to hit a lot harder, especially with Hoarfrost, for example. So definitely going to keep playing those. In terms of Nurgle, I do think that Nurgle has a lot of interesting builds right now because it was discounted a lot. So my opponent was able to field a lot more wounds into the game. That was felt. And the ability of dealing the mortal wounds and doing the attrition game against an elite army like Lumineth is a big plus if you can keep it up. This was not exactly the type of army that can go into melee and stay there because it had a lot of Beasts of Nurgle, but it does inflict a lot of damage and it's very quick. It was on me round 2, so it isn't that slow. Despite that, what I felt is that the Bile Piper is just absolutely key to keeping your army in a good place and in good health, so to speak, because it's Nurgle. I do think the Great Unclean One has a lot of potential. He used it relatively well, although I do think that he needed to support him better during the attrition game because it got stuck alone in melee for a while. But without the pile-in stuff and with all of the rules coming from the Cycle of Corruption also, it may be very solid. So Nurgle needs to be, of course, well played because it's sequencing with the Cycle of Corruption, but I do think he did a relatively good job and it's a good list. So he can work on that list, he can perfect it further. He can summon more and he can summon other things. He didn't have everything at the time to summon, so he could summon stuff, but he didn't have the models. And I do think it's a good fit for this army, this type of list. In the end, the double turns influenced a lot of the game. Both his, where he kind of thinned down stuff and conquered a lot of ground, and mine also, because from the 3rd to the 4th, it basically dictated the fate of the rest of his middle forces. So it made him relatively unable to come back from that. So thank you for watching. This is a new thing I'm trying out. Instead of writing all of this stuff, I'm speaking in the end. Hopefully it's more entertaining to see. And I'm avoiding the intermediate tactical debates about what happened during that specific turn to make things a little bit quicker to edit. But please provide your feedback. Please hit the like button. Please comment away. We're trying out new things. Thank you.